This is the evening news from Moscow. You're listening to simultaneous interpretation from the Russian by John Glad. The program is entitled News 1. In Russian, Новости 1. Good evening. Today we have on the news the fate of the Black Sea fleet. A press conference of Admirals Kasatonov and Chernavin. Kazakhstan will have its own army. Today, Yeltsin is in Nizhny Novgorod. Prices in Tajikistan and Turkmenistan are being determined, and there are coupons in Ukraine. The Tokyo Declaration in Japan. Poles protest over economic moves of the new cabinet. And now we have the day's news. The disintegration of the former Soviet Union, the fate of the Black Sea fleet, the introduction of coupon, and the absence of united ruble territory. All this threatens the life of the new Commonwealth, and these are the topics of our report today. There was an important press conference on the fate of the fleet. There's one in Sevastopol and the other in Moscow. This Black Sea fleet has roughly 300 ships. These are varying functions on these ships. They can carry nuclear weapons and carry out operative strategic operations in protecting our southern borders. The sailors who signed an oath of loyalty find themselves in a difficult situation. There are questions of their social conditions to be determined yet. Today, Admiral Kasatonov conducted a press conference in Sevastopol. He confirmed that our fleet is divisible and indivisible. That is the opinion is indivisible is opinion of most of all our officers. It is not permissible that the Russian fleet be sold off. Not one person on the Black Sea fleet has signed the Ukrainian loyalty oath, according to Chernavin. The Black Sea fleet was created on the basis of the former Soviet fleet. On the cruiser, which just left, named the Kuznetsov, has sailors of 30 nationalities. And if one of them swears loyalty to Ukraine, another to Russia, another to Tajikistan, I don't know whom I would swear an oath to. Should we force this? Shouldn't we not determine what's going to happen first? What is part of strategy and what is not a part of strategy? To whom should we swear loyalty? Whose property is this? The armed forces, including the Black Sea sailors, continue to display restraint and calm. But evidently, it's not appropriate to test these qualities without end and to make the atmosphere more tense. It's hard not to agree with Admiral Chernavin. The situation with the Black Sea fleet, likewise the question of our housing, our railroads, these are all questions of politics, and these are not real agreements. Viktor Kanyetsky is a name which we all know. On the basis of his children's books and his adult books. Perhaps you know his book, The Striped Cruise, but we know him not only as an author of film scenarios, but he's sailed a lot of time in the Arctic. Today, if we speak about the fleet, this probably is a topic for very serious conversation. We need, I think, less emotions. We have to be calm in allotting Ukraine necessary small guarding ships, protective ships, which any independent state has a right to own to protect its shores. But the fighting core of the Black Sea fleet, which is based in Sevastopol, and is not only the fighting core of our navy, but links us with the world's oceans. In my opinion, this is, and should be a Russian fleet. The Nakhimov, the Kornilov, the Lazarev, the Estonia, the Atlebin, Surgeon Pirogov, who operated on these admirals before their death. These are sacred items with which I cannot agree to part. The Minister of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine, Zelenko, said that the declaration of Yeltsin was hasty and emotional. He said that he was amazed by the statement. No matter how terrible this might sound, the Black Sea Fleet has become a card in a political game, which will affect all of us economically. I have in mind our daily bread, because if we don't resolve our political questions, we cannot hope to fix our economy. The ministers of foreign affairs of our republics are doing their best. They have a lot of problems in front of them. The meeting should have begun, but there was no Ukrainian delegation. But Minister Zelenko, as soon as he arrived, denied all these rumors. We consider that the negotiations should be constructive and lead us to mutually acceptable decisions, and we are prepared to work on this basis. This is Mr. Kozyryev, who is the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Russia. I would say we don't have a conflict between countries, but a conflict of points of view. A conflict between states. This is a political clash of insurmountable interests. But here we have a search between Russia and Ukraine for a solution. 5 points here. First of all, to create a working group within which the heads of state can meet. We have to have a mechanism. The second is very complex. We have to observe international agreements on nuclear and conventional forces and their reduction. The Russians proposing that we have a joint armed forces. The negotiations are complex, but the participants are just developing their positions. We have to overcome the fears of the past. There's a fear of a dictatorship from the center, and we have to find compromise in such emotional questions as the fate of the Black Sea Fleet. Andrei Kozyryev said we had to get used to discuss and argue, and if necessary, to conduct new negotiations. Soon, these negotiations will have lasted a long time. Since they're still going on. The breakup of the army is a problem. In Almaty, there's a meeting of the Ministry of Defense of Kazakhstan. At this first meeting, which was presided over by Nazarbayev, who's the president of the country, and likewise the Minister of Defense, they discussed the agreement signed by the majority of states in the Commonwealth. There's to be inventory taken of units situated or stationed in Kazakhstan. There will be a Republican Guard of roughly 2,500 persons, which will have as its basic goal the protection of the constitutional structures of the Republic. There's a draft of the which will determine the status of the Guard. There is also a presidential order on internal troops, which will be handed over to Major General Gardeyev as commander. Military units will have dual subordination. There will also be a reorganization of the military academy in Almaty and change it into a more broadly based university, something like the Suvorov institution. We have an important piece of news from the press center of the armed forces of the Commonwealth. Troops have been sent to clarify the situation with the loyalty oath. Who should take it? In what order? The documents were handed over for them to get acquainted with. The recommendations to be developed will be debated at an all-army meeting of officers, which will take place on the 17th of January in Moscow. The troops have been instructed up till then to not ask the troops to sign any personal oath of loyalty. The President of Russia, Boris Yeltsin, who just completed a trip to Saratov, Nizhny Novgorod, and Ulyanovsk, had a lot of serious criticism to hear over the liberalization of prices. He expected to have rotten eggs thrown at him, but that didn't happen. People are still impressed by his decisiveness and his frank request that he be permitted to work. Today he was in Nizhny Novgorod. Today in the morning in Nizhny Novgorod, the President visited a food store in the Mytny market. There was an important event today. In the middle of the day, the bread line started to disappear. There are none at all today, and there is bread for sale. We don't want to link the two events together, but we hope that the city authorities and bakers have found an optimal decision to satisfy the buyers and the purchasers who find themselves in a state of light shock. And Yeltsin was amazed that the prices at the market were sometimes lower than in the market. He was unhappy with the market, which had inflated prices. I gave the order today that within a day that this market be eliminated. This thieving takes place with regard to dairy products. He ordered the governor of the oblast to liquidate this area, but whether we're going to have more dairy products, who knows, and whether it will be more cheap. In talking to the residents of Nizhny Novgorod at the gas factory, he asked for support of economic reforms, and he stressed the fact that in 6 or 8 months there would be a stabilization of the economy. By the end of the year, there will be a stabilization of the economy and an improvement in living conditions. I promised that in the election campaign, and I confirm that today. In the second half of the day, before leaving for Moscow, Yeltsin met with the leaders of the administration of 12 oblasts who had arrived in Nizhny Novgorod to talk to him. His speech in Moscow is linked to a decision to picket his White House by Germans in the Soviet Union. This is in protest against his declaration that there would be no German autonomy unless the Germans comprised 90% of the population. Today, where there was a liberalization of prices in Tajikistan and Turkmenistan, the freeing up of prices will take place Soviet style. As earlier, there is freedom, but regulated freedom within the conditions of state trade. The directors of the stores of Nizhny Novgorod say that some goods, groceries, had the prices lower to take into account the capability of the population to pay. But here we don't see the law of supply and demand being observed. The deficits, the shortages are still there. The bread lines in Moscow don't have to do with that. Afraid that the high price might reduce the demand, and thus the stores ordered only 1,600 tons a day. For next day, they ordered 2,600 tons. So there will be bread for tomorrow without lines. But the stale, unbought bread will be written off at the expense of the municipal budget. This is the decision of the city fathers. The city budget is a bottomless barrel. So how can it eliminate its deficits? It would appear that our hope to survive the liberalization of prices by drinking relatively cheap milk will not be realized. Milk is being bought by processors for 4 rubles 20 kopecks. They're selling it for 4.90, but then they have to sell it for ruble 95 kopecks, and they're supposed to be compensated from the budget, the government's budget. But what do you think? Will the stores sell for cheap if everyone's asking for it and willing to pay any price? This is Mrs. Borodina, who says there's no certainty that the stores will receive these compensation payments. And people are not paying out compensation, are afraid there won't be compensation as they expected. So we should see a meeting. We have a meeting, and the milk producers are not happy with the price of 4.90 a liter. They're going to raise it to 5, perhaps 6 rubles a liter. If a package of milk, a carton of milk, costs 4 rubles, do you think that people are going to buy only for their children for cereal? It may be that if we will have a price of 7 or 7.50 a liter, who is right, the processors or the stores? Today, the government of Kazakhstan is adopting special measures to lower prices on dairy products and bread. The subsidies will be funded with by 10 million rubles. They're looking for the money. This is a vicious circle of subsidies. Today in Uzbekistan, coupons were introduced, which are used together with rubles. Later on, there should be a liberalization of prices. The decision will be taken on the 13th of the month at the Supreme Soviet of the Republic. 12% of the population, 20% of the coupons will be issued in place of salaries. That is, 20% of salaries will be coupons in the Ukraine. So the man is saying here, so they can't divide up those submarines. They ought to solve these problems and then only worry about submarines. For Ukrainians, the first problem is that of coupons and the empty shelves and the nightmarish prices. Today, coupons began to be used. On the previous evening, bank employees worked very hard to produce them, and all the workers received a coupon advance, a minimum of 300 rubles and a maximum of 600 karbovanets coupons. The state stores are selling only for coupons, and no savings or rubles will help. All the citizens of Ukraine thus have been equally impoverished. And how many other surprises are being prepared for us by this competition of 2 currencies in 1 market. In Tallinn, the stores became empty unexpectedly just before the holidays. Everything was missing, even bread. The market prices rose by 3 or 4 times. What happened? Still in November, we showed the full stores in Estonia, but it would appear that the market mechanism was functioning. But now something unheard of is happening. We have bread lines in Estonia. To explain the situation, no one is able to do that. But there is still more dissatisfaction over the absurd situation in the Republic when the government and the Supreme Soviet and the Estonian committee, it's a sort of alternative parliament, find themselves unable to find a common language. The passing of the law is being delayed since prices for machinery and fuel are not being set. The peasants are not selling goods at the common prices. They're waiting for an Estonian currency, which should be introduced in a few months. Utilizing the uncontrolled system of market rations, the entrepreneurs are receiving super profits. There is no economic program. Sober-minded politicians have a very black view of things. In the Supreme Soviet of Estonia, they continue the Christmas holidays. Estonia has begun its reforms before us, having turned down a unified ruble territory, and the situation gives us food for thought. The process of disintegration is being very deleterious with regard to heavy industry. We already reported that the Chelyabinsk metallurgical factory is on the verge of shutting down. It is the largest producer of high-quality steel. Because of a lack of coal, we've lost 40,000 tons of steel, and these losses will be growing. Help us. This is the director of the factory. So many factories are receiving our metal. I turned to the miners of Kemerov, to the mines in Raspad, Beryozov, Siberia. I asked the miners of Karaganda. We're grateful. They supported us last year. Only if we work together on a friendly basis can we extract ourselves from this crisis in which our industry finds itself. The provisional government of Georgia says the events in Tbilisi were a democratic rebellion against the authoritarian regime of Gamsakhuria. The provisional government intends to conduct parliamentary elections. A cabinet headed by Tingis Sigwa will take all necessary measures to regulate the situation in Southern Ossetia and Abkhazia. The agreement with the members of the Commonwealth, it is stated in the declaration, will be determined by the new parliament of Georgia. Tingis Sigwa has not excluded the possibility that the Republic may enter into the Commonwealth. He stated that after a thorough study of the question, the government would report to Parliament, which would adopt a final decision. Tingis Sigwa also said that in the near future there would be negotiations with the presidents of Russia and Ukraine, and they would try to regulate economic relations between the three republics of the former Soviet Union. According to Jabans Aseliani, there was a movement of armed groups consisting of supporters of Gamsakhuria, but he did not report any other details. According to Interfax, 10 parties of Georgia have supported the handing over of power to the new provisional government headed by Tingis Sigwa. According to the Rio agency in Yerevan, Gamsakhuria has asked Armenia for temporary political sanctuary. According to Rio, this is not a matter of giving him permanent sanctuary or asylum. More likely, the president of Georgia will have the opportunity to spend a little more time on the territory of Armenia. Yesterday, a column of 13 cars from the Caucasian border area came into conflict with the border guards. They demanded the border guards hand over their weapons, otherwise they said they would destroy them. The border guards took up a defensive position. Colonel Grigorievich was taken hostage. The column continued its movement only after he was exchanged for 36 automatic rifles, 2 machine guns, and 2 grenade throwers. Today there was a meeting by telephone between Yeltsin and the Prime Minister of Great Britain, Mr. Major. Major, being the chairman of the Security Council in the UN, he invited Yeltsin to take part in a meeting on the 31st of January in a Security Council meeting. Yeltsin accepted. During the talk, there was discussion of Yeltsin's possibly visiting Great Britain on the 29th and the 30th. During the discussion, Yeltsin informed Major as to the situation which had been created with regard to the Black Sea Fleet and Russia's position on this question. Major heard him out with understanding. We have more and more questions, not only within the country, but within the world as a whole. Today, at the invitation of the President of Ukraine, Kravchuk, the former Secretary of State of the United States, Henry Kissinger, arrived for a visit. There was an hour-and-a-half confidential meeting where they discussed a broad range of questions of interest to both sides. Today in Brussels, there was a special session of the European Community with regard to the new Commonwealth and the situation in Yugoslavia. The European Community appealed to all elements in Georgia to make peace. In the statement, it was stated that the observance of human rights was a necessary thing. Today in Bonn, there was the first this year speech of Helmut Kohl, who is the Chancellor. He stated that the Federal Republic would continue to hold to the spirit and letter of the agreements with the former Soviet Union and expected the same treatment in return. Today, the President of the United States, George Bush, returned home after his trip throughout the Pacific region. Over 12 days, he visited Australia, Singapore, South Korea, and Japan, and negotiated with the leaders of these countries on a broad range of international questions. The global partnership, which has the goal of creating a prosperous world and to be worthy of the 21st century, that is the leitmotif of the Tokyo Declaration. Japan insisted on this document being issued. Up till now, there has been no basis, really, for cooperation other than the Soviet threat, which no longer exists. The Americans' main interest was the trade deficit. There were promises that measures would be taken to liquidate friction. Bush is being called an automobile salesman during this trip by the press. But they have to take us into account here. The speeches which took place on the part of Bush state that the United States supports the return of the Kuril Islands to Japan by the former Soviet Union, and the countries of Asia will play a positive role in creating the former totalitarian state into a democracy with a market mechanism. The president or chairman of the PLO, Yasser Arafat, was in Baghdad for negotiations with Saddam Hussein on the situation in the Middle East. He discussed the Arab-Israeli negotiations. Instead of the resigned Pierre Mauroy, the new socialist chairman will be Laurent Fabius, about whom we don't know all that much. It was an irony of fate that the 45-year-old Fabius, who was always elegant and pleasant, he took the place of Mauroy. He became the youngest Prime Minister of France. He will now have to struggle to renew his party. The party is having a hard time. Fabius is very popular among young people and among white-collar workers, and the socialists hope that will give him a lot of votes. Laurent Fabius is a person who knows how to negotiate, and he does not quarrel with other politicians, and is considered to be a very probable successor to Mitterrand. Today in Whitehall, in the center of London, there was a bomb exploded. The police was warned about the action, and thus the authorities were able to evacuate the people. The IRA took responsibility for the act. The first steps of the Polish cabinet in economics have caused a lot of protests. The government began by raising prices on electricity, natural gas, and central heat. That in itself will reduce family budgets, and that will lead to a rise in prices. And that's not the first time. Salaries have dropped up to 40%. In many cities of Poland, there are strikes and demonstrations of protest. The famous BMW firm in Bavaria, that is the business card of Germany. But there are a lot of foreigners working here. Italians, Turks, Yugoslavs. The Soviet Union negotiated for 2 years to send our people to work here. And during the visit here of the president of Alexander Shokin, the negotiations got off, were able to get a move ahead, and there is a quota for workers to come here to work, and from 11 to 13,000 workers will come to work here on a contract basis to receive honestly earned marks and then later return to Russia. This year, our workers will be able to come here not as emigres, but to come here on a contractual basis and work in Germany. This is a civilized form of labor immigration, and it will permit us to avoid a brain drain and to create a new professional group of people who will accumulate experience abroad. It's still not clear how they're going to pick the people who will come. Know that there will be many of them, we need not have any doubts. We note with pain and even despair that we have virtually lost morality, the morality which Russia of old was so proud of. There's so much thieving going on. People are being robbed who are the weakest and sickest. There's not a lot of hope that the countries abroad will help us. In 10 days of this year, the first 10 days, the Republic received only 340 tons of assistance, and that's not much even for a small town. But there's a lot of talk about this. And there's a lot of dishonest people who are trying to make to profit. There's more talk about help than help. We are expecting major deliveries by the end of January through the government under reform conditions, and we hope to guarantee the fairness of the system of distribution. There are people who have lost all principles and are benefiting from the people's tragedies. Can the government take measures to put a stop to this? We hope to have the assistance of the army to use its warehouses. We hope to look to the organization bodies of law and order for delivery and to protect this humanitarian assistance. But the main thing is that we are creating a mechanism by which the assistance would be rendered to the most needy regions. This report was delivered at the first meeting of the Commission on International Humanitarian Assistance in the Russian Federation. Now, this is pleasant information for my daughter and all school children. In Moscow, the school vacations have been extended. Vacation has been extended by 3 days, and that includes the 15th of January. This is sport coming up. You're listening to simultaneous interpretation from the Russian by John Glad. One of the latest news has to the biathlon taking place in Nizhovsk. The Yevgeny Redkin from Yekaterinburg was first place, Sergei Tarasov was second, and Vladimir Rashkov was third. Among the women in the 20-kilometer strip, Svetlana Taramygina from Belarus came in first place. Just the countdown for Albertville is already begun, and the teams are being set up, but the organizers are working, communications are being set up, and it's hoped that everything is set up. This has special sale here, 10-20%. 8,000 volunteers will don an identical equipment and will get a discount in buying it. After the competition of 4 jumps, we're having the World Cup here. This is a very this is Martin Hulvat from Austria, who came in first place. Tony Nieminen came in 9th place. He's got 137 points, and he's leading by far. Professional tennis players have their new senate. In a few days, there will be the Grand Slam and the Championship of Australia, but for the meantime, it's minor tournaments. In Sydney, in South Wales, we see Guy Forget beat David Wheaton and Emilio Sanchez. Gabriela Sabatini was seated first, and she beat the American Gigi Hernandez. As for our female tennis players, Laila Miski dropped out when she lost to Mary Jo Fernandez. As they say, things start very quickly. The participants in the Paris-Tripoli-Cape Town rally have arrived in the Angola port of Labito for the latest stretch, which is 441 kilometers. The Finn Harri Vatanen is coming in first place, and Eddie Oriole is doing very well. 3 of our Kamazes are still in the race, and one team has returned home. Before the weather, I tell you about the natural elements. For the 6th day in Karakalpakia, we see a flooding taking place. The river is flooding the agricultural regions of Karakalpakia. Women and old children, women and old folks are being evacuated. There's a lot of work by engineers and helicopter pilots and workers to fight with the elements. There have been no casualties. The chief concern is to help people who have turned out to be homeless. This is the weather coming up now. In Belarusia, it's 0 to -5 Celsius, some snow in the north. Moldova, formerly Moldavia, 0 to +5 Celsius. Remember, 0 is freezing. Ukraine, it's 0, that is freezing, 32. Armenia, -3 to -8. Azerbaijan, +7 to +12. But in the mountains, it's 0 to +3. In the central regions, -2 to -8. A little bit of snow. In the Urals, 0 to -5. Snows and snowstorms. In Turkmenistan, +6 to +11. In Tajikistan, it's +3 to +8. In Kazakhstan, -2 to +3. In the central and eastern region, -7 to -12. In Novosibirsk, Tomsk, Altai, 0 to -5. In the Krasnoyarsk region, -7 to -12. And getting down to -39 in the Tamir region. It's 40 degrees Fahrenheit, too. In the Irkutsk region, it gets down to -13. In St. Petersburg, it's 0 to -2 with some precipitation. And in Moscow, it's -11 to -13 at night and -3 to -5 in the daytime. And you've been listening to simultaneous interpretation from the Russian by John Glad. And this has been a program of the Informational Television Agency.